Hello everyone, this is my first ever YouTube video, so if I'm a bit awkward, that is why. I just wanted to jump on here and upload my birth story. So my name is Elizabeth, I am 26, this is little Harriet, she is 7 months old today. I am an Australian midwife and I had a beautiful unmedicated labour and birth with Harriet. And when I was preparing for my labour, I heavily relied on watching like natural labour and birth vlogs on YouTube, and I really think that largely contributed to my birth experience. So I wanted to jump on and tell my story. I had a beautiful pregnancy, but where do I even start? I had always wanted to be a mother ever since I was a little girl, and in my family, birth was very openly talked about, and breastfeeding. My mum is a midwife, so I grew up reading her textbooks, and I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be a midwife myself. When I finished school, I started studying midwifery and took a few years off from it because I wasn't mature enough to be dealing with women in their childbearing years. I didn't know anything about life really, so took a few years off, worked full time, and went back to the degree and graduated when I was 23. And all this time I really wanted to have a baby, but I knew that I wanted to finish my degree first before I entered into motherhood. I met my fiance Jay in 2020 and we got engaged in 2021. Realized that the wedding wasn't going to happen because of COVID, so we decided to try and fall pregnant. I fell pregnant on my first month of trying. I had been off contraception for 6 months at that time, and I was just tracking my cycle on the Flow app, which I would highly recommend to everyone. Coming off contraception was the best thing I ever did for myself. Mentally and physically, I felt amazing coming off it. And then our first month of trying, I fell pregnant. And it was such a strange mix of emotions because my whole life I had really wanted a baby, and I can't even tell you how many pregnancy tests I'd taken in my life when I was on contraception. So I knew that it would be negative all those times, but seeing the negative every time was like devastating to me, even though I wasn't actively trying with my exes. It just showed how badly I wanted it. So when I took the test, which was Harriet, and it was positive, of course I was like shaking, I couldn't believe it. But the first feeling I felt was like fear. I was so daunted. And so was Jay when I told him. We kind of went to bed that night and we were just sitting there like, oh my God, what's about to happen? So yeah, I had a beautiful pregnancy. I continued to work 4 days a week throughout the pregnancy as a midwife, and I had a bit of morning sickness until about 14 weeks, but I rarely vomited from it. It was just like constant nausea, but that was nice when that passed. And then the rest of the pregnancy was a breeze. I placed a lot of importance on trusting my own intuition and instinct when I was pregnant. It was a really beautiful experience because there was no fear, there was no anxiety. I just was like, well, what will be, will be. And I just knew in myself that me and my baby were fine. So there were a few antenatal tests that I declined, and that came from a point of being very informed and educated, and I was able to make those decisions for myself. But yeah, so just sailed through the pregnancy. I was actually living in a different town to Jay at the time. I was working, and we own a farm, so I was working away from the farm and would commute back on my days off. So life kind of just continued as normal for me when I was pregnant. I went on maternity leave at 35 weeks. And that was because towards the end, I started getting really bad epigastric pain, which can be a sign of preeclampsia, and my blood pressure was starting to climb a little bit, not to the point that it was a red flag for anyone, but it was kind of trending in that direction. So I thought, clearly work is too much. My body's trying to tell me that whatever I'm doing is a bit too much. So I went on maternity leave 2 weeks early. Yeah, I settled down at the farm, and that waiting game begun for my baby. And I felt those emotions that every woman feels towards the end. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be pregnant forever. This baby's never coming. I started doing some hand expression of colostrum at about 36 weeks, and all up I got about 30 mils. So I was really happy with that. The other thing that I was eating was dates. I was having 6 dates a day because there is evidence behind that it can speed up your labor. So yeah, I will never eat another date again until I'm pregnant. I feel like I overdosed on dates. But yeah, so they were the only 2 things that I was really doing. I was really listening to my body in those final few weeks. If my body was telling me to rest all day, I did that. I didn't put any pressure on myself to get up and go for a walk and, do all the things that you should be doing to try and get your body ready. I just was listening to it. And I think that's the best thing you can do. You know your body better than any doctor, any midwife, any person in your life, really. So if you really listen to it, and trust your instinct, that's the best thing that you can do. That's what I believe anyway for myself. My mum came to stay when I was 38 weeks because the plan always was that she would come and stay for around a month so that she could be there when the baby was born and then help us cook and clean once the baby came. She came at 38 weeks. We didn't have the nursery ready or anything, but we're in the middle of house renovations, so we had no kitchen. Half the house was torn up. I'll insert some photos here. It was an absolute shit show, to be honest. And being so heavily pregnant in the warmer months of the year with no kitchen and builders everywhere, and it was very overwhelming. I can obviously look back on it and laugh now. When I was 40 weeks and 0 days, so on the dot, I always said that I didn't want to do any type of intervention prior to term. So when I was on my due date, I happened to have a midwife's appointment. I should probably mention I went through a midwifery-led model of care, which it was the best option for me because I trust midwives through and through. I really think if you can find a good midwifery continuity program, the midwives have your best interest at heart and they listen to you and they learn what is important to you. I was seeing the midwives at my little local hospital where I actually used to work as well. And at this appointment, the midwife that I saw asked if I wanted a stretch and sweep. And I said to her, I'd like you to do a vaginal examination, and if my cervix is somewhat open, then yes, but I want it to be a vigorous one so that it's actually doing something. Because with every vaginal examination, it's that, there's a risk of infection because you're putting a foreign body up into your vagina. So I didn't want to just go in there willy-nilly. I wanted it to be with a purpose. Did the vaginal examination and I was 1 centimeter dilated by 2 centimeters effaced, and my baby's head was at -1. So really, for a first-time mum, that's pretty good. And it showed that my body was starting to get ready for labor. You can never really know from a vaginal examination when you're gonna go into labor. Like, you may do a VE and someone is 4 centimeters and they may not birth for another 2 weeks, or they may be long and closed and go into labor that night. So it's not an exact science. I wanted her to do a stretch and sweep. So she did. It hurt like hell. And for the rest of that day, I was starting to get some cramping, which was really exciting to me. I was like, okay, great. Like, oh my God, I was so excited to experience labor. And there was just no fear. I had no fear about the pain that I was going to go through. Even though I witness it every day at work, I was really excited to experience it for myself. And I just knew that everything was going to be fine. We were wandering around my local town, and yeah, I was getting some cramping. I was excited, and my mum was excited. And we drove home, and that night I continued to get the cramping. It was like bad period pain, but it definitely had no rhythm. They weren't contractions, I'd say. It was all lower abdominal, and it was very tolerable. Like, oh, really? Yeah, so that was exciting, but I knew that, you know, the chances of it actually turning into labor were pretty minimal. Then what happened? So the next day I was 40 weeks and 1 day, and I woke up in the morning still pregnant, and those tightenings had kind of died off completely. Like, I went out to mum in the morning and she's like, how are the tightenings? I'm like, oh, they're gone. So yeah, that was a bit anticlimactic, but that whole day my body was telling me, just rest. And my mum, bless her cotton socks, she means well, but she's like, come on, you got to get up, you got to move, do this, do that. And I was like, no, like something's telling me just to relax. The whole day I spent on the couch with the construction going on around me in our house. And then in the afternoon, my mum was like, right, that's it, we're going for a walk. And I was like, fine. We live on a farm, so we just walked up to our cattle yards. And on that walk, I had two more cramps. And they were enough to make me kind of stop. And I was like, oh, this seems good. So we went inside, we had dinner. We've had a bit of a cold in our house, so Harry's just got a bit of a cough. We went inside and had dinner, and my mum was exhausted, so we had an early night. I think she went to bed at like 7:30, and Jay was up watching the footy. And I went into my bedroom, and I was sitting on the floor, and I started getting a bit more of these cramps. That lower abdominal, heavy, crampy feeling, and I started to get really shaky. Kind of like when your blood sugar drops too low, but I didn't feel sick. I just was like shaky, and that was different for me. My baby's movements were really beautiful and normal, but I knew that tonight was probably the night. So it's 9:40 on the 15th of April, so I'm 40 and 1, and just now, probably within the last hour, I've been what I think are contractions 1 in 10. So just thought I'd give the heads up. May fizzle into nothing, we shall see. So I went out to Jay and I just told him, like, I think you should probably have an early night. I feel like something might happen tonight. He was like, oh, now? Like, should I go to bed? I was like, no, like, you know, just keep it in mind. Don't stay up all night watching the footy. And the whole way through the pregnancy, I hadn't made Jay come to any birth classes or anything with me because, one, I already talk about birth enough at home. Like, I'm so passionate as a midwife. It's all he hears about. But also, all I said to him throughout the pregnancy was, all you need to be is quietly supportive for me in labor. I don't have any expectations of you doing, like, rubbing my back like that or, you know, doing my pressure points or anything. I just need you to be listening and aware. And if I need something, I will ask you for it. Otherwise, just be quietly supportive. I think that prepared him enough, you know. So He came to bed at around 10 o'clock, and at this point I was getting tightenings one every 10 or so minutes, and I was timing it on this like crappy contraction counter, and it was enough for me to kind of, you know, be moving my toes a bit and holding my breath a bit. It was hurting down into my rectum. It kind of felt like really bad diarrhea cramps. But what I'm feeling is like this shooting pain down through my anus. Jesus. Ow. Like, so painful. At the time, I didn't really know what I was feeling. I thought that I needed to go to the toilet, but looking back, I was in early labor. And I've got two really good girlfriends who are also midwives, and I sent that Snapchat to them, and one of them was like, "You're in labor, bestie." And I was like, "No, I don't think so." Because I have a really bad pain threshold. For some reason, I thought it would be so much worse. I thought that I would be like crying at that point if I was in early labor. So in my head, I was like, oh no, it's just cramps from the stretch and sweep 2 days ago. Yeah, so when Jay came to bed, I was timing these contractions, and I would sleep for 10 minutes and then it would wake me up. I'd start the timer, and yeah, so I was doing that until like 3 a.m. And like some of them were pretty bad. I was kind of squirming around in bed, not enough to wake up Jay, but I was like, "Whew, this is something." And baby was moving. Yeah, it was so weird. Like, I look back at my camera roll and I was screenshotting things from TikTok, saving videos, sending them to friends. Like, I just was really relaxed. I was like, if this is labor, then cool, we'll be fine. Then at 3:30, I got this big tightening, this big contraction where I was like, oh God, that was big. And at the end of it, my waters broke. I was lying down in bed. I felt a trickle between my legs and I was like, oh my God, my waters have just broken. Like, I just felt so excited because I knew, okay, like I'm gonna have a baby, like this is happening. And often when a woman's water breaks, it either goes from 0 to 100 really quickly, or sometimes it can peter out completely. And then, you know, then you also get the gradual increase in contractions. Every woman is so different. So I rolled over and I was like, Jay, my waters have broken. And he did the whole, oh God, what's happening? What? He jumped out of bed and he's like, oh, I'll change the sheets for you. And I was like waddling down our really long hallway in our old house to go to the bathroom. And on the way was Mum's room, and she heard the kerfuffle and she woke up. She's like, what's going on? I'm like, my waters have broken. They were beautiful and clear. I had no concerns. I have a home Doppler. I wouldn't recommend it for someone that's not a midwife or a doctor, because there's so much more to listening to the baby's heart than just listening and going, oh yeah, it's there. Like, it requires interpretation. So, but because I live an hour from the closest hospital, I assessed the fetal heart rate on my own and determined that everything was fine. I called my local hospital just to let them know that my waters had broken, that the fluid was clear, that baby was happy and moving, and I would present when I was ready. With that rupture of membranes came my mucus plug. There was no blood in it. It was just straight mucus. Jay's in the middle of changing the sheets on the bed and he goes, I'm just gonna go move the cattle. And he says that it was so that he didn't have to think about it. If we were going into the hospital later that day, he wouldn't have to be thinking, I need to move the cattle. Whereas I think he just was freaking out a bit. So I was like, yeah, you're fine, because my contractions had died off completely at this point. And yeah, so I got in the shower for 40 minutes and kind of waited for the next contraction that didn't come. And I was so deflated. I'm standing there going, shit, like, I was just so excited, but it was fine. I got out of the shower and it was Easter Saturday. And at this point it would have been about 4 o'clock, 4:15 in the morning. And my mum made me some hot cross buns and braided my hair because I really wanted my hair to be braided and out of my face for when I did go into labor. So I washed my hair, mum braided it, and I got into bed with my animals. And it was a really special moment because I love my animals so much, and I knew that this was the last time I was ever just going to be a fur mum to them. So I sat with them. I feel emotional talking about it because it was such a beautiful day, but becoming a mum is such a massive shift. Like, you go from, you know, being so independent, being able to do whatever you want. And I really recognized in that moment that everything was about to change, and it was bittersweet. So I sat with my animals and mum shot this really beautiful photo. And then because the contractions had died off, we all agreed, okay, we'll go back to bed. So, and while Jay was down the back moving the cattle at 3 in the morning, he crashed the car into a ditch. So he called me, he's like, oh, is the baby coming? I was like, no, we're gonna go back to bed. Why? And he's like, oh, I've just crashed the car. I'm like, okay, that's typical. I offered to go pick him up from down the back of our property. He's like, no, I'll walk. I think he just needed a breather. So he walked back to the house and we all got back into bed. So this would have been at, 4:30. I slept for an hour. There was no contractions in that time. And then at 5:30, I woke up to this almighty contraction. It was enough to make me sit up, like jump off the bed, jump onto the floor where I had my birth ball, and get down on my birth ball and like start breathing through. Someone's had dinner, but I forgot to put in that I downloaded an app called Freya, which I had actually heard of from someone else's birth vlog. And it was amazing. I'll put in screenshots here of what my contractions were doing. But from the get-go, they were like 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute sometimes. Like, they were so close together. But this app works well because it encourages you to breathe and reminds you to be calm and tells you that everything's okay. It's a hypnobirthing app. 100% recommend. It was awesome. So I'll insert some screenshots here of my contractions. I was in such a zone during these contractions. I knew that they were close together, but I didn't recognize quite how close together they were. And like I said, we live an hour from the closest hospital. But I had said that I really wanted to leave it till the last minute to get in the car, factoring in the drive, because there is so much to be said for staying at home as long as possible. As long as everything is normal, it can really expedite your delivery. And because the more comfortable you feel, the quicker you'll progress. It's just nature's way. So, and I felt good at home. I was coping. I was on hands and knees over my ball, timing these contractions. And in between, I had both my doggies sitting there with me. And it was really beautiful. Like, it was hard, but I was like, okay, I can do this. But also in my head, I was thinking, midwife brain, okay, I'm probably 1 centimeter right now, and this hurts like hell. So I was a bit conflicted, and I had said to my mum, I don't want you to tell me what to do at all throughout my labor. If I want something, I will ask for it. So mum and Jay are like quietly, can I have that, darling, my glasses? Mum and Jay are like creeping around me as I'm having these contractions, packing the car. Mum was fully dressed, Jay was dressed, because mum knew in her head, okay, I think she's actually further along than she's thinking, because I was going, I'm only 1 centimeter, and mum's like, oh, no, I think you're doing well, darling. Like, she was supporting me, but from afar, because that's what I said I wanted, and I really appreciate that looking back. She has a look at my contraction counter on this app, and she goes, Elizabeth, your contractions are a minute apart. I think we should probably go to hospital. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I had a heat pack on my back. I felt good, and I felt like something in my body was telling me, no, don't move from this position. Don't move. So I was like, just a bit longer. And with every contraction, I could feel lots of pressure down into my rectum. And as a midwife, surely I would have joined the dots to be like, I'm getting there. But I was like, 1 centimeter. Like, I don't know what I was doing. In this stage of labor, I was very quiet. All of this internal monologue, like the 2 centimeters, 1 centimeter, was in my head. I was very quiet. And during the contraction, I was just going, trying to breathe through it. Convinced me. She's like, Elizabeth, I think it's time to go. Packed the car, everything's ready, let's go. So I got up after this contraction and started to walk down the hallway with Jay next to me. And I think the change in position, the next contraction that hit, I was standing. Oh my God, the intensity went from here to here, like it just in one contraction. And I started screaming with that contraction because I turned off my hypnobirthing app to go to the car. And I was leaning over Jay and I was like, and Mum's like, it's all right. But in between contractions, I was totally fine. So I was like, when that contraction ended, I was like, okay, power walk down the hallway a bit more. We've got like a 20-meter hallway. And I get about 5 meters and another contraction hits, and there's a bedroom there. And I got down on the carpet and I was wailing and everything. And Mum goes, Elizabeth, are you going to be able to sit in the car? Really? And I was like, no. And she's like, okay, well, let's just go into the bathroom. Everything's fine. It's okay. And so in that moment, we decided, okay, I'm having a home birth because I am not getting in a car. I'm not getting in an ambulance. I feel safe here. I know that everything's fine. Ushered me into the bathroom and we ran the shower, and I got into the shower, and Jay called an ambulance because I had said the whole way through my pregnancy, if I crack on quickly and I'm at home, I am not going to hospital. I will stay there, but we'll call an ambulance so that we have paramedics there in case the baby needs resus or something. So yeah, Jay called the paramedics and said, Elizabeth's a midwife, her mum's a midwife who's also here. So we'd like someone to attend, but we don't want you to intervene. Like, we kind of just want you to be there just in case. I think it took about 20 minutes for the ambos to rock up. And in the meantime, I was in the shower, and the shower was amazing for me. But we have this like shit little box shower. So in between contractions, I was on hands and knees, and Mum was so good because she was like, if you need to make noise, make noise. And I was so much more vocal than I thought I would be. I screamed through each contraction, but that helped me. I loved that because it was almost a form of distraction for me. Pain of a contraction is just so visceral. It is so hard to explain. It is so internal, and there's nothing that anyone can do to fix it. And I remember thinking in that moment in the shower, even though I really wanted a natural birth, I was so relieved that I was at home, because I knew if I was in a hospital setting that I would be asking for pain relief that I really didn't actually want. So it was very hard being at home knowing that, oh my God, I would love some gas right now. But I also knew there is literally zero pain relief that I can access here at home. So it was a real mix of emotions. But I was like, no, I can do this in the shower. It's all right, I can do this. And then the hot water ran out because I'd had the 40-minute shower. We live on a farm, so when the hot water ran out, I had a bit of a meltdown. I was like, oh my God, I'm 3 centimeters. Like, for some reason, I just was thinking, midwife brain, it's been about 30 minutes. I'm probably 3 centimeters by now. When really I was very transitional. I was so vocal. I felt nauseous. I was feeling pressure. I had all the signs of being very close to fully dilated, but the dots weren't joining in my head, but they were joining in Mum's head. She knew we're getting very close to having a baby. At this point, the paramedics rocked up and they were lovely. I think this probably would have been about 6:10, maybe 6:15. And they were lovely. They were 2 men and they were so respectful because I had said, I don't want you to intervene. So they just stood at the bathroom door for the rest of the labor. Not once did they try and push anything on me or try and suggest, let's go to hospital. They stood in the door. And when the hot water ran out, I crawled out of the shower onto the bathroom floor, and it clicked in my mind then, okay, this is where I'm gonna have my baby. Something clicked over to tell me I'm much further along than I thought I was. So Jay was amazing. He built this little linen nest for me with all the pillows and doonas in our house, and that's where I labored, on the bathroom floor there. And I just really listened to my body when it was telling me to get in different positions. I was in hands and knees, and then I tried side lying, then I tried on my back, but everything kind of brought me back to hands and knees, and I was happy to be there. I still was screaming through every contraction, but that transition, that nausea had gone, which was nice for me. But I was saying to the ambos, I need some pain relief, I need some pain relief. And they're like, the only thing we've got is the green whistle. And I was like, just give it to me. But I literally took one suck of it and I was like, this is shit. Because for that kind of drug, you really need to steadily breathe on it. And I just was so far past that. And nothing was going to help that pain at that point except an epidural. Obviously, I'm not going to get that on the bathroom floor. Not too long after that, the whole way through, since I had been in the shower, my body was instinctively telling me to grab at my labia with my right hand. And you can see that in these photos here. And I really think that was nature's way of slowing the descent of the baby's head so that I didn't tear. Every contraction I was kind of grabbing at my vagina or just inserting my fingers so they were just inside the vaginal cavity. Anyway, when I was on hands and knees there, I started to get the urge to push. I was doing a few involuntary pushes with these next few contractions. My mum was sitting at the back of me, keeping an eye on everything. And yeah, the pressure of needing to push was insane. It really was just I needed to do the biggest poo of my life. And Mum said to me, Elizabeth, do you want to try and maybe give a push? And I was like, I am pushing. So with the next contraction, I thought in my head, okay, I'm actively going to push now because my body is telling me I'm ready. And yeah, with the next 4 pushes, I birthed her head, and it was still painful, but it felt kind of a little better to be able to work with the pain and push against something. And yeah, I had my fingers there and I could feel the head descending, and very slowly as she crowned, my hand was instinctively guarding the head and my perineum. And the head was born, and Mum took this photo of the head, and in that moment, oh my God, all the pain went away. I was sitting like this, Mum was behind me, Jay was here, and the paramedics were at the door, and we were chatting. I was like, oh my God, is the head out? And I was like, Jay, make sure you get photos of this. I knew with the next push, I was going to be a mum, which was just insane. But the environment that I was in, it was honestly the most beautiful birth I have ever witnessed. And I've seen a lot of births, and I just feel so privileged that it was my birth because it was such a beautiful moment. And I felt so safe and so comfortable in my own house with my mum and my fiance, and I wish that every woman got that kind of birth experience, because they definitely don't, and I think that's really sad. With the next push, my mum guided the shoulders out, and the baby was born, and she screamed straight away. I didn't know the gender though, and she was crying, and I moved from hands and knees to sitting, and mum gave me my baby, and I just, here are the photos that she took in that moment. The euphoria of that moment was so special. It was years and years of wanting a baby and a beautiful pregnancy and a beautiful labor, and I was finally holding my baby, and I just kept going, my baby, my baby, my baby. And it was just so beautiful. But it was like 3 minutes before mum was like, are you going to check what you've got? I just didn't even think to check what gender the baby was, because I didn't care. I just was so happy that I had my baby in my arms, and they were pink and screaming and happy. Throughout the pregnancy, I was sure that I was having a boy. I always pictured myself with boys. So when I checked between her legs and there was a vagina, I was so shocked. I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, it's a girl, it's a girl. And oh my God, it was amazing. Like, waiting to find out the gender of your baby until they're born is like next level. It was amazing. I really wanted a physiological third stage. I didn't want any drugs or Synto or anything. So on the bathroom floor for an hour waiting for the placenta, and I was getting contractions, and Harriet had latched and was feeding to try and like expedite the delivery of the placenta, but it just wasn't coming. It just felt like insane pressure in my bottom, and I tried to give a few pushes, but it didn't come out. Looking back, I wasn't pushing hard enough. I do think that it was sitting right there in my cervix. My phone died. Yeah, so I think I wasn't pushing hard enough to get that placenta out, but I was also aware that I was at home and I didn't want to pull on the cord or do anything that could cause me to have a bleed, because I was so far from the hospital. I tried to sit on the toilet and push it out. It just wasn't coming, and I was slowly trickling. There wasn't a ridiculous amount of blood, but I was aware of it. After an hour, I asked the paramedics if I could have some Synto, which is just an injection that they give in your leg, which can help the placenta to come. So they gave that, and nothing happened. So I originally wanted a lotus birth, but because the placenta wasn't coming and we would probably need to do a transfer to hospital for that, I was like, okay, that's fine. So we cut and clamped the cord on the bathroom floor. And while this was all happening, I was just like listening to the radio, early 2000s music. It was so beautiful and relaxed, and Harriet was a gem. Like, once she'd done that initial crying, she was super chilled after that. And she had an hour of delayed cord clamping, so that was amazing. We cut and clamped the cord, and mum went and dressed Harriet, and I had a shower because we agreed we were going to go to hospital to sort out this placenta. Also, if you have a unplanned home birth in Australia, you need to present to hospital within 48 hours to register the baby. So I was like, whatever, like, we need to go to hospital anyway. We'll just go via ambulance. So I had a shower, and I think when I had that shower, the adrenaline started to wear off a bit, and I started to feel a bit sick and a bit gross. It had just been such a whirlwind. She was born at 6:50, I forgot to say, so it was like an hour and a half that established labor. So it was a lot for my body to go through. So I was in the shower and I was like, I feel a bit sick. Got out of the shower, got into a nightie and some Ugg boots, and we went to the ambulance. And like I said, our house was going through renos, so it literally looked like the biggest shit show. We've got this photo out the front of our house with like all our demolition shit everywhere getting into the ambulance. Yeah, so Jay drove in the car in convoy with the ambulance, and I was in the ambulance with Harriet, and it was super relaxed. when you've still got a placenta inside, it is quite painful because it's not allowing the uterus to contract. The uterus is kind of contracting around the placenta, which is quite painful. So I did have some morphine while we were in the ambulance, which I loved. I was like, I've done this all naturally. The baby's out now, give me the morphine. I was so ecstatic that I had had this baby at home and I had my natural labor and everything went well, and I just was so relieved. I felt so proud of myself. So we got there and they literally like put some clamps on the cord that was still coming out of my vagina and like gently pulled, and the placenta came out in one piece, which was awesome. So I do think I probably could have just pushed a bit harder and it would have come, but anyway. So the placenta came out and there was no further bleeding. They checked me and I just had like a little 1st degree gutter tear in my vagina, which I declined to get sutured. They said it probably didn't need stitches anyway, but I was like, no, I don't want it sutured. Just in hospital for a couple of hours while Harriet had some tests done, like her hearing screen, and a doctor checked her over to make sure that she was all good. And yeah, we got to hospital about 9:30 in the morning and we went home at 3 p.m. We got in the car. You right? We got in the car and drove home, and when we got home, Mum had cleaned up the murder scene in the bathroom and had cooked us dinner. And it was just surreal, like being at home with my baby that evening, a cooked roast dinner, a glass of champagne, and got into bed that night with Harriet in the bassinet next to me. It was the most amazing experience. And as a result, I really want to open my own business in childbirth education for rural women around the area that I live, so that more women can feel as comfortable as I did in their own bodies and trust their instincts. And the hospitals, midwives and doctors are there for a reason. Birth doesn't always go according to plan. But for healthy, low-risk women, I think there needs to be more of an emphasis put on women being very in tune with their bodies, accessing the hospital setting if they need it throughout their pregnancy. But home birth is an amazing option, and I just wish that it was more accessible for Australian women. I really want to open my own business and kind of guide other women through being very informed and educated, and therefore improving their birth experience. One challenge that I had postnatally was breastfeeding. I always knew that I wanted to breastfeed, but I didn't quite anticipate how difficult it would be for me. Like on day one, the nipple damage already was shocking. Harriet didn't have any tongue ties or anything, and her latch looked really good. The damage was shocking. Like I was crying every time I went to feed her. So I went and saw a lactation consultant at the hospital, and she was like, you really need to rest your nipples. My milk hadn't come in yet, so I couldn't even really express. I just was giving Harry the colostrum that I'd previously gotten when I was pregnant, but that ran out pretty quickly. So she did say, if you want to give formula, just give it for 24 hours, rest your nipples, and then reapproach the breastfeeding. So after a day of resting the nipples and using hydrogel discs and lots of lanolin, and after that 2 days, she never had formula again. We did persist with the breastfeeding, and she's now 7 months old, and I'm still exclusively breastfeeding. But it hurt until like 4 or 5 months. It was uncomfortable. My nipples would go through periods of being really bruised randomly, and then they'd be fine again. But I persisted, and I'm really proud of myself for that. And I really enjoy breastfeeding her. I think it's a beautiful bond. So my advice to women is, if you really want to breastfeed, you can. 9 times out of 10 you can. You just need to persist and access The Australian Breastfeeding Association are amazing. They've got 24-hour breastfeeding hotline if you need help. There's lots of online resources. Pay the money to see a good lactation consultant, and in time it will come, but it's not normally a quick process, which blows my mind for something so natural. But yeah, it took me 4 months. And even now to this day, there's times where I get like a lot of nausea when I get a letdown. I'm like, oh God, I feel like shit. Breastfeeding is such a mix of emotions. You get the highs and the lows, but overall I feel like I'm doing what's best for my baby. So I continued with breastfeeding because it was important to me. So yeah, that's my story. If you've got any questions, please leave me a comment. But yeah, hopefully on this channel, I'm going to start uploading some more education-based videos. But yeah, that's my birth story. So thank you for listening. I'm really happy to share it with people. I've been holding it in for like 7 months, so it's awesome to be able to tell people about my experience.